You ever notice how, when the night gets real quiet, every little sound seems bigger than it is? Well, that's where we were, 5 of us, huddled around a sputtering fire in the middle of the Allegheny woods. The flames had burned low, casting just enough light to make the shadows seem alive, twitching at the edge of our vision. Nobody said it out loud, but we'd all heard it. That slow, deliberate rustle just beyond the circle of light. Not a rabbit scurrying, not a raccoon nosing around. Too heavy, too steady. The funny part was how we all played it cool. Mark poked the fire like he hadn't heard a thing. Jess cracked open another soda, real casual, though her hands weren't as steady as she wanted them to be. I remember my own voice coming out too loud when I said, "Just the wind," like I was convincing myself more than anybody else, and yet every one of us leaned a little closer to the flames. Then came the sound again, branches snapping, deliberate steps in the underbrush, and that was it. Every single one of us thought the same thing, but didn't dare speak it. Bear, a big hungry one, drawn by the scent of our dinner scraps. You could feel the tension floating around the fire like smoke, each of us waiting for someone else to say what we all knew, but no one did. Not then. We all sat there, stiff as logs, pretending not to be scared, while secretly picturing a pair of glowing eyes just out there in the dark waiting. The fire popped just then, sending sparks into the air, and every head jerked toward the trees at once. It was almost comical how fast we snapped back to normal afterward, each of us pretending we hadn't flinched. I tried to steady my hands by reaching for the coffee pot, balanced on a flat rock, but the handle burned me, and I let out a hiss that made Jess nearly spill her drink. Mark muttered something about needing more wood and stood up a little too fast, like movement alone could prove he wasn't worried. Truth was, none of us wanted to leave the circle of light. You could feel it, the darkness pressing in, thick and watchful. Even the night sounds had quieted. No crickets chirping, no owls hooting, just that restless wind sliding through the leaves. It was the kind of silence that makes you believe you're being studied. Sam, the youngest of us, finally spoke. "If it is a bear," he whispered, "what do we do?" Nobody answered. Nobody wanted to break the illusion that it was all in our heads. So we just sat there, 5 campers, around a fire, each pretending to shrug it off, while secretly measuring the distance to the tent, the car, the nearest tree that might hold a climber. Then, as if to test our nerves, the noise came again, closer this time. A heavy step, a pause, and then another. Slow and purposeful. The air seemed colder in that moment, and I swear the fire shrank down a little, like it was in on the secret. Jess gripped her soda can so tight it crinkled. Mark stopped fiddling with the wood and just froze. Sam leaned forward, his eyes wide. And me? I stared at the dark gap between the trees, every muscle tight, my mouth dry, thinking the same thing they were all thinking. Please, don't let it be a bear. The third time we heard it, there was no denying the weight of those steps. Crunch. Pause. Crunch. The sound of something big shifting its weight on damp leaves. My throat felt like it had closed up, and I remember glancing at Mark, hoping he'd be the brave one to take charge. He just stared at the trees, jaw tight, his hand white-knuckled around the poker stick, like it was a weapon. Jess swallowed hard, her soda forgotten on the ground. Sam leaned so close to the fire, his knees nearly brushed the coals. We all heard the low huff of breath then, carried just enough by the wind. Not a deer's startled snort, not the chatter of a raccoon. This was heavier, deeper, like an engine buried in fur. The unspoken thought hit us all at once. It's right there. I grabbed the lantern from beside my pack, struck a match with clumsy fingers and lit it. The glow pushed against the dark, but it only made the trees beyond look denser, more shadowed. That's when Jess whispered, "It's watching us." Her voice cracked, and for a second I thought she might cry. Mark finally broke the silence. "All right," he muttered, standing straighter. "We're not just gonna sit here." He picked up a pot from beside the fire and clanged it hard with the poker. The sound rang out sharp and metallic, echoing through the trees. Sam flinched, Jess covered her ears, and I just sat there holding the lantern, waiting for something to charge out of the dark. Instead, the footsteps stopped. Silence, that awful heavy silence again. We all leaned in, breath held, hearts hammering, until, snap, a branch cracked, closer than before. Sam yelped. Jess muttered a prayer. My grip tightened on the lantern so hard I thought the glass might break. Then, just as Mark raised the pot to clang again, we saw it. A shape moving between the trees. Low to the ground, but big. Too big. It paused at the edge of the firelight. A blur of fur and shadow, eyes glinting faintly in the glow. None of us breathed. And for one long, impossible moment, I was sure, absolutely sure, we were face to face with a bear. That shadow stepped forward, and every instinct in me screamed bear. The firelight flickered against a bulky frame, hunched and dark. Jess gave a soft gasp. Sam practically crawled backward into the dirt, and Mark raised that pot like it was a shield. My own legs twitched, ready to bolt, though my brain kept insisting, "Don't run, never run from a bear." But then, as the glow stretched farther, the shape came clearer. Not the wide shoulders or lumbering gait of a black bear. No. This thing was low, sinewy, with ears perked and a twitching nose. My heart still hammered, but slowly my mind caught up. It wasn't a bear at all. It was a dog. Mangy-looking mutt, ribs showing, its fur patchy in the glow. It padded cautiously toward the fire, sniffing the air, tail wagging, in these uncertain little sweeps. For a beat, none of us spoke, all five of us, still locked in our own imagined terror, too shocked to process how quickly fear had turned into something else. Finally, Jess laughed, a short, shaky sound that broke the spell. "Oh my God," she said. "We almost had heart attacks over a dog." Sam slumped against a log, muttering. I was ready to climb a tree. Even Mark, who'd been gripping that pot like a battle axe, lowered it sheepishly and muttered, "Well, it sounded big." The mutt wagged harder at the sound of voices, stepping closer, tongue lolling out in a goofy grin. It was friendly enough, though thin and clearly astray. I set the lantern down and reached for a scrap of bread from the cooler. The dog snatched it quick, wolfing it down before looking back at me with hopeful eyes. Relief washed over the camp like a tide. Laughter bubbled up, nervous at first, then full and free, filling the quiet night that had seemed so menacing just minutes before. All that fear, all those pounding hearts, melted into amusement. But even as we fed scraps to the stray and joked about our overblown imaginations, I caught myself glancing into the trees again. Because here's the thing, out in those woods, bears were real. And just because this time it was a dog, didn't mean next time we'd be so lucky. By the time the fire settled into glowing embers, that mutt had curled up right beside us, like he belonged there all along. Sam stroked its scruffy fur. Jess whispered soft apologies for ever thinking it was a monster, and Mark shook his head at himself for nearly waging war with a soup pot. We were all worn out from the adrenaline, the laughter, and the realization of how close fear can sit to humor when the dark presses in. We let the dog stay the night, figuring he'd wander off when the sun came up. But as I lay in my sleeping bag, listening to the soft breathing of my friends and the occasional sigh of the mutt beside the fire, my mind kept circling back to that silence before we knew the truth. The way we each pretended calm, while inside our hearts thundered and every sense strained for what we couldn't see. That's what the woods do to you. They remind you how small you really are, and how quick your imagination can twist shadows into teeth and claws. Morning broke bright and calm, and with the daylight came a little sheepishness. We joked about it over oatmeal, calling ourselves bear slayers, and teasing Sam about climbing trees. The dog padded off down the trail, leaving us with empty bowls and full spirits. But in our eyes there was still that memory, that recognition of how fragile courage can be when the night presses close. Funny thing is, I don't remember much else about that trip. What trails we hiked, what meals we cooked, or how long we stayed. What stuck was that moment of pretending we weren't afraid, and the way fear dissolved into laughter once the truth stepped into the firelight. It became one of those stories we told again and again, sometimes with exaggeration, sometimes with a little pride, but always with that same thread of honesty. None of us were braver than the other. We were all just people in the dark, waiting for something to step out. And if I learned anything from that night, it's this: courage isn't about not feeling fear. It's about holding steady until you know what you're really facing. Sometimes it's a bear. Sometimes it's just a hungry stray. But the lesson is the same. You'll never know until you stare into the dark and find out.